This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Good evening, EduFolk. I hope you are well. Lucy here, but only very briefly to introduce the lovely Hannah's show this evening. She is going to be talking to Steve. Now, I've been trying to work out for the past 20 minutes if it's Steve Bladen or Steve Bladen, but I'm sure Hannah momentarily will correct me. And I can see her guest has already popped in and he is ready to go as well. So speaker request coming your way as well, Steve. So please accept that as soon as you see it and we can get underway with the focus this evening that is Flexi timetables and mental health. And although the focus I believe is students this evening, I wonder if this could be something that we could implement for teachers as well. So I'm intrigued to see where this goes. How are you doing, Hannah?
I'm good. Thank you very much for hosting tonight. Just a reminder that tonight is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? You can use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your orders. So don't miss out. Make sure you visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. So happy reading.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
So thank you, Steve, for joining me tonight. I feel like we're like the follow-on. So Nathan had an amazing show last night where he was joined by Dr. Naomi Fisher on the psychology of attendance. And tonight we're talking about kind of how you support children and how to get them back into schools. So Steve, he has a blog, and I found your blog and found it really interesting because I've recently moved to a school which doesn't have as good attendance as previously, and I've started working with some students and kind of getting them into school and trying to focus on that. And it's just really got me down this little rabbit hole of trying to find out everything I can possibly about attendance and anxiety and how we can correctly get students into school and get them kind of involved in education again. But Steve is a former head teacher with a 24-year career. You have had many hats across the years, including being a head teacher of a 3-form infant school, which sounds like massive. And you've done it in both urban Blackburn and rural Lincolnshire. So you've got like kind of across the board. But not only that, you've got your own child as well that's going through anxiety and has struggled with going into school, and you've kind of helped her go through that to get back into school. So thank you so much for joining me tonight. I'll just check that you can hear and you can speak and everything's fine.
Hi, yeah, I can hear you fine. Can you hear me?
I can indeed. Because I find this really interesting because you've got both hats. You've got the proper head teacher hat that's had all the pressure to try and get kids attending and have the data and stuff yourself. But then you've kind of gone through it as a parent as well. How has it kind of changed your opinion going through the process yourself compared to when you were like a head teacher?
Could I just say thanks for inviting me onto this show tonight. As you mentioned, I've written quite prolifically about the last 18 months, but this is one of the first times I've spoken. So I hope I can, contribute helpfully to the discussion around this topic. As you said, I've had a long career in primary education, and both as a teacher and a head teacher, I have been involved in working with and supporting children with all types of vulnerabilities and difficulties. And in more recent years, that's involved supporting children whose struggles with mental health has sometimes meant that they've had difficulties in either attending school or attending regularly or engaging with education when they're in school. But in truth, nothing really prepared me for the very same thing happening to me and to my wife and to our family. And if I'm honest, my experience as an educator, as a teacher and a leader has been very valid and very varied. But the most powerful, the most harrowing, the most eye-opening experience of my life has been the last 18 months when one of my own children, I have 4 children of school age, one of my own children fell ill with anxiety, very quickly became consumed by it. And after 5 or 6 months, temporarily fell out of school. And it's just been like nothing I can really put into words. You know, as an educator, you see these things, you work with families, you can have opinions, you can have strategies. But really, you're just seeing a snapshot into a family's life and into their day. And what I've really come to understand is, when it's your own child, this is not just about school attendance. It's not just about education. It's about their life. It's about their very health and safety and well-being. And it's 24/7. It's every day. It's through the night. It's at weekends. It's in the school holidays. It's not something that just gets turned on and off. And it's utterly consuming for both the child and the family. And so I guess the greatest learning curve has been understanding firsthand exactly what's happening when a child becomes unwell with mental health issues, and trying to make sense of the world, which includes education and includes school attendance.
And with that, how do you, because obviously there's so much pressure on schools to kind of have their attendance up. I mean, I still find it, the school that I moved actually had attendance written in their Ofsted report, which I think is kind of cruel. It's not their fault that these children have got mental disorders that means that they're just incapable of coming into school, but there's provisions supported for them. They're all accessing learning. I can see every day when they've logged on. But it just seems like there's so much accountability kind of put onto the schools, and it then creates this real pressure between the school and the parent, and the parent and the child trying to get the child in. It just makes it, I always felt like it was a bit of a pressure cooker. It isn't a great combination in having that come down almost from the D of E all the way down.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I would recall, that the pressure's always been there, but things have changed over the last few years, certainly in the pandemic era. But really before that, I mean, when I first started out as a head, which was in 2011, I think at that time, the measure of persistent absenteeism was, 20% absence, 80% attendance. And that's gradually changed as expectations increased, and that was 85% attendance and then 90% attendance. And the narrative in the background has gradually been changing. And it's always been a school's job and a head teacher, ultimately, the head teacher's accountability around managing attendance and trying to have attendance as high as possible for all pupils. That's always been part of school leadership. What's changed really in the last few years is, and I think this has particularly been exacerbated by the pandemic, as health has deteriorated, as many other factors have contributed to increased absence. Absence and school attendance has really been in the limelight, in the national media, on social media, culminating in, the last few months, the government's Moments Matter campaign, which is all around school attendance. And there is a fundamental problem here because we're in a position where we've not really known such high absence figures in the modern era. And there is a political agenda to focus on attendance. And when you see the rhetoric around, for example, the current Moments Matter campaign, you'll see the kind of words that are used around The child seemed fine. They were unwell this morning, but now they're fine. The wording, which is part of the social media campaign around Moments Matter, says things like, children are often safer or in a better place in school than at home. And there's a very particular narrative around children's attendance increasing. And I think you can summarize that by saying the agenda is really attendance at all costs. And what I would say is the cost is very high, because this is not a mathematical problem. This is not about, a calculation. It's not, this isn't just, logarithms and numbers on a page. These are actually people's lives. And behind every single absence in every school of the country, there's a story behind every absence. And quite often when it comes to a prolonged absence, which might be deemed persistent absence, often you're talking about children in crisis or turmoil, where they and their families are crying out for help, and that has any number of manifestations. But in the very darkest scenarios, these are perhaps children who are self-harming, physically very ill, maybe with suicidal ideation, and these can be really dire circumstances. And so for people like me, when we find ourselves in a situation where one of our own children are unwell and breaking before our eyes, it's very, very painful having a national political agenda from the government telling schools and telling parents how important school is, and that children must be in school, and if they miss this number of lessons or this many days, then their chances of getting this many GCSE passes is lowered, or their life chances are reduced. And I guess one of my key messages is that actually, what's more important than attendance is health. And the current absence in school attendance is driven primarily by ill health and mental ill health. But as the conversation we're having tonight is around mental health, and it's an area which has increased massively and rapidly and feels like it's spiraling out of control.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
School absence, a seemingly ever-present feature in our news at the moment, has raised its head again, this time in the form of fines for parents. The Guardian covers the detail that fines in England for unauthorised absence are set to rise by 33%. Education Secretary Gillian Keegan said she was bringing penalties under a national framework to help tackle inconsistencies. The Department for Education said fines must be considered if a child misses 5 days of school for unauthorised absence. Under the new rules, the initial penalty notices will increase from £60 to £80 per parent per child. Anyone who cannot pay within 21 days will have to pay £160 rather than the current £120. Schools will also share daily registers online with the Department for Education as part of the drive to improve. ASCL's Jeff Barton said the wider issues linked with poor attendance, such as anxiety, disengagement with education and wider social problems, needed addressing by working with families rather than fining them. Labour's Bridget Phillipson said the Conservative government was only just waking up to the damage of persistent absence, but that they should address the causes rather than the symptoms. The Daily Mail highlights the continuing difficulties faced by some schools in recruiting appropriate specialist staff for some subject areas. It reports on one school's desperation and the measures they have had to take by putting large numbers of pupils into masterclasses to support the teaching of science GCSE. Whilst the article describes the decision as a drastic measure, it points out that there is a nationwide crisis in teacher recruitment and retention, and government missing its teacher training targets yet again. Schools are increasingly using non-specialist teachers to cover classes, so the masterclass approach could be here to stay for a little while longer. School holidays featured in the news again, with the debate centring on the long summer break. It prompted much discussion on social media, and teachers, school staff and parents all joined in the debate. The Guardian, however, chose to focus on the benefits one school trust said it had noticed, this time in the area of staff attendance and well-being. The Unity Schools Partnership Trust found that staff absences fell by 50% after it extended the autumn half-term by a week in both its primary and secondary schools. Pupil illness absence also fell by 25%. 58% of parents supported the change, which is now permanent, although parents of younger children expressed worries around childcare. In Wales, the BBC reports that the government has admitted to failing to follow the law when stopping free school meals during the holidays after the summer of 2023. Two families and a legal charity claimed ministers had not considered the rights of children. The government accepted it should have done more to assess the effect of the decision, but the Education Minister in Wales said the government could not afford to reintroduce the meals. The government will have to pay the legal costs of the claimants. Finally, the BBC also focuses on a scheme in one Lancashire high school which is encouraging students to embrace phone-free days. Pupils are able to hand in their mobile phones before lessons, and pupils themselves report greater focus and fewer distractions. But the school leaders also report reductions in incidents of bullying and online abuse. Esther Jai, mother of murdered schoolgirl Brianna Jai, has also had a video meeting this week with PM Rishi Sunak to discuss her campaign for greater online safety and an age limit for smartphones. She described the meeting as really productive. Schools were issued new guidance on mobile technology in February of this year. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I've got the figures I've got from the NHS study that so the rates of probable mental illness disorders have increased since 2017. So in 6 to 16-year-olds from 1 to 9 to 1 in 6, and in 17 to 19-year-olds from 1 in 10 to 1 in 6. So it's massively increased. And if you have a mental illness, they're saying you are 10% of 6 to 16-year-olds are missing more than 15 days of school during the 2020 autumn term, and children with probable mental disorders were twice as likely to miss that school, so they were 18.2%. So obviously it is adding to that. And it was interesting that you said about the physical stuff, because my niece is year 11. She's got a lung disease and she even has a portacath, so she has a little box in her heart because she's had so many long lines go in through her arm that she can no longer have them go in that way. So they have to go in through the portacath. And I was visiting her, staying down there when I was doing the lovely BET conference with everyone at Teach Talk Radio. And she was like, I need to go in and do my trampolining assessment. I'm like, you've got tubes hanging out of your heart. You can't go in and do your trampolining assessment. She's like, well, I can at least go in and do my English presentation. If I don't go in and do it in front of the class, I won't get a distinction. And I was like, well, you can do it in front of me. But her presentation was actually all about how exercise helps her mentally and how the positive benefits of mental health with sport and stuff. So it was really interesting that even as a 16-year-old that she was kind of very into that and understood that. But just the pressure that she felt to go in and perform. But I was kind of to it. So I know you're very, very intelligent and your targets are very high and you should get those targets had you been in school normally. But her attendance is 40%. And it's like, but you will still succeed, and you will the life skills you've been through, having gone through this experience, will give you far more skills than the other people in the classroom. You'll come out stronger with more grit and more determination to succeed. And that's the thing I want. I don't know how to get that across to these young people, that like that I can't remember who says it, the famous saying, this too shall pass. Like, when you get through this, when it passes, you will come out the other side stronger. But it's how we get them to that point. How do we get them to be strong? It's whether this whole like where you stiff upper lip English kind of thing, you just have to get on with it, you have to go into school and deal with it, or there's this other kind of, we need to take it step by step and go slowly. But I think mental illness, even though it isn't a physical illness, you still need time to recover. And I think that's the thing, that it's not always seen as an actual illness. There's like, you need to come in, it's not recognized. And I know we spoke about that before, about kind of what schools sign up things as whether it's an absent or an unauthorized absence. Like, what kind of thing do they register it? What's kind of things have you experienced in the way that schools deal with that absences?
In terms of the coding of absence, it's fair to say that there's a spectrum of how mental health related absence is being recorded in school registers, and therefore how it's kind of supported from the start. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So my view is very clear, both as having been a head teacher and as a parent. Illness is illness, and sometimes it's physical illness, sometimes it's mental illness, sometimes mental illness has physical symptoms and manifestations, sometimes it seemingly doesn't. Sometimes illness can be short, or it can be an accident, sometimes it can be long-term, chronic, hidden, all those different variations. In my view, illness is illness, and as a head teacher, I very, very seldom disputed when a parent told me that their child was ill. You know, you have relationships with families. You can see when things aren't right. You know when children are unwell, and with that in mind, I mean, there were odd exceptions, but generally, thinking about 12 years of headship, you know, a child is ill. In my mind, their absence from school should be authorised, and when they are well enough, if everything else is right, then hopefully they will be back in school. Actually, in terms of the DFE, and, you know, my goodness, over the years I've had, you know, I've often disputed DFE guidance, but the DFE guidance around attendance and ill health is actually really quite clear. And so the document Working Together to Improve School Attendance, which is currently a guidance document rather than a statutory document, that sets out many pieces of guidance around school attendance, including when it relates to ill health. And what it states is that when children are not well enough to attend school, schools it actually uses the word must. It says absences must be authorised, but obviously that's guidance. So it's, even though it's saying must, that's not statutory. So schools are still have the discretion and the jurisdiction to make their own decision. But that in itself is problematic, because what people are finding is it's a lottery, and some schools, the best schools, will authorise absence relating to mental health issues, and when you're a parent of a child who is consumed with mental illness, the support starts with that decision to have the absence authorised. Because when it's being authorised, what the school are saying is, we understand, we're listening, we know what you've got is genuine, legitimate, it's making it difficult to attend school, and we authorise that. So legally, that's an approved, understood absence. Conversely, if a school decides that the absence should not be authorised, it ultimately means one of a few things. It either means that the school doesn't believe that the illness is genuine, or that the illness isn't severe enough to warrant the child from being absent, or they simply don't want to authorise it for other reasons. But when you're the parent of a child and the absence is unauthorised, that's the opposite of support, because you feel judged, you feel not believed, and you feel that you're going to be in for a rough ride, because at the outset, you've got a battle there, and with the view being that the child should be in school, and whatever's happening to them doesn't warrant them being out of school. So the parent feels judged or blamed, and it doesn't actually address the issues causing the child to be out of school. Does all of that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And you told me yesterday something that I was really shocked by. I didn't realise, because obviously a lot of schools ask for GP letters as proof of their mental illnesses, but actually the DfE recommend not putting that pressure on GPs.
Yeah, so I don't actually have the document in front of me, but it is there in black and white, and there's a paragraph around medical evidence. And so I'm not quoting directly here, but what the gist of the paragraph is, that schools shouldn't routinely be asking for medical evidence when a child is unwell or not well enough to attend school. And I think it actually goes as far as to say something like, they shouldn't be seeking evidence because of the pressure, the additional pressure that puts on the NHS. And again, I'm not here criticising schools when they do that, but I think as a starting point, it is actually very clear. If you're a new school leader, for example, and you're looking at what the baseline should be, what the starting point should be, perhaps behind an attendance policy, it is actually very clear, and it's saying, don't routinely ask for medical evidence, because that will put pressure on NHS services. And obviously, we're talking here about hundreds of thousands of children who are absent from school. And quite obviously, if all of those GPs were asked for medical evidence, there would be a huge time commitment there, and they wouldn't be able to provide it very quickly either. So that's a problem in itself. Another issue around this is sometimes with anxiety in particular, sometimes schools are now asking for evidence which can't actually be satisfied. So sometimes a school will ask for a letter from a GP, but a GP might not be prepared to write the letter. And in fact, I've seen recently signs in GP surgeries saying, you don't need to ask for things such as, and then there's a list, and one of them is a letter to evidence your child's illness. So we're in a bit of a pickle, really, because on the one hand, the DfE is saying don't routinely ask for evidence. Sometimes schools are asking for evidence, but often when evidence is asked for, parents are finding they can't actually get it, and then because of that, the absence remains unauthorised. And ultimately, the problem with that is families can find that they are actually issued with penalty notices, and in the very, very worst circumstances, prosecuted when it actually relates to ill health. So it might be that you've got a CAMHS appointment, but you might not even have a date for that appointment. And so because you've got nothing concrete to show. You can't actually, clinically prove what your child is suffering from, but as a parent that they're very ill. So you can't satisfy that demand. So really, I would say, as a parent, but also having been ahead, it should really be very, very rare circumstances when schools refuse to authorise an absence around mental health. And it certainly shouldn't be commonplace where medical evidence is sought.
And it's interesting you bring up kind of CAMHS. I think that's half the issue with this, that it just seems to be there is really long waiting list to get there. And the children are in such a bad state by the time they get there, they're not necessarily accessing it. I know my sister's a Senko and has students, specifically one that's quite regularly quite violent and really struggling with their mental health, has waited years to see CAMHS, finally got an appointment, told the lady to F off, and they've refused to see him and told them the school needed to deal with him. And it's these, I just feel like these students are not getting the help that they need as quickly as they need. And I know kind of they've announced all these new little hubs, but I think is it 2025 that they're going to be there. So I just don't know whether it's enough soon enough, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, one of the points I would like to convey is that there's an urgency here which I don't think is appreciated on a national scale. This isn't just an attendance crisis or a persistent absence crisis, or even just in inverted commas, a mental health crisis. This is a generational crisis for our society, and it's absolutely urgent. And I'll just add a few more statistics to the ones which you shared. So in 2022, there were 1.4 million referrals to children and young people's mental health services. The latest figures show that there are an average of 600 emergency CAMHS referrals every week for young people. So those aren't the ongoing CAMHS referrals. Those are 600 emergency, where the most urgent, extreme cases. 1 in 3 CAMHS referrals doesn't result in treatment. So, you might have a referral to CAMHS, you might have the initial triage appointment or assessment, and then if deemed kind of able to see their service, you might then have a wait of 18 months, 2 years, 3 years to be seen. And then in that window of time, 1 in 3 of those referrals doesn't end up in any treatment. And we're talking about children, in dire circumstances. There's all types of mental health illness, but with my own daughter, we were, in a matter of months, we were seeing self-harm, eating problems, agoraphobia, things which we would never have dreamed of, and they came on very, very quickly. And there's an absolute urgency around, you're absolutely right, around treating children as quickly as possible. And the problem is, particularly with anxiety, what we know is many children, particularly girls, but not exclusively girls, many children, initially there's an element of masking. And so children might be in school, they might be, or maybe they are beginning to have attendance issues, maybe missing a lesson here or a day there. And it might not be obvious initially that something is wrong. And I get that. I totally get that as a teacher and a head teacher. But by the time that a child hits crisis, there might have been many months of things slowly becoming problematic or falling apart, behind the mask. And the problem is then, if as a parent or a school you then put a referral in, and you might be looking at months or years before help comes. If you then apply that logic to other illnesses like accidents like broken bones, or a burst appendix, or really difficult and harrowing things like cancer. We know in all instances that your best chance of recovery and long-term success is the right treatment being put in place very quickly from the right people, and having a whole approach where professionals wrap themselves around the person. They have team meetings, don't they, about cancer patients, where everybody's together, they come up with a plan, they commit to the plan, as quickly as possible, and that's the focus. And what we know about mental health is, and it's not a criticism of the CAMS service, but we know it's a system under incredible strain. And by the time that highly vulnerable children are referred to that service, they're looking at an extremely long wait. And in the meantime, to come back to schools and education, the focus is all on the child's attendance.
The thing is, it's not. I think there's like a little bit of a misconception that it's, if kids aren't attending school, it's because something's wrong with their home life. There's a safeguarding risk. We must get them into school. That's where they're safest. But actually, this is happening to all kinds of families. Obviously, there are those situations where you do need to safeguard those students, but the mental health doesn't discriminate. This is all types of families and all types of students. It's not like we're just seeing a certain kind of category. It is across the board.
Yeah, and I think we could spend the next hour kind of busting all sorts of myths around anxiety and mental health and absence from school. It's been really eye-opening for me, and we can have unconscious bias and expect certain things, but the truth is health isn't interested in earnings or class or geographical location or race or culture or language. And although some things can make you more vulnerable, what we're seeing around mental health is it spans all backgrounds, all demographics. It's not about poor people. It's not about poor parenting. It's not about people being disenfranchised or not wanting to engage with the system. This is children of all ages. I've seen children as young as 4 with emerging mental health issues. We're talking about right up into further and higher education. And I mentioned to you when we had a brief chat yesterday, 2 of our closest family friends who've got children the same ages as my children. We all live in different towns. We're all similar people of a similar age. Our children go to different schools and academies, in different trusts or local authorities, and all loving backgrounds, supportive, wanting the best. And each of our 3 families have a child who is or has been desperately struggling and either is in the system or on the periphery or fallen out of the mainstream system. And the sooner that we recognize as a profession that this can be anybody, and it's not about being poor parents or it's not about any of those things. Any child, just like any adult, can become vulnerable. Any of us as adults can suffer from mental health issues, and equally any child can. And there might be factors that might make them more likely to suffer, but equally these things can happen to anyone. And if I may just mention a bit about my own daughter here, would that be okay? So as I said, I've got 4 children off school age, and my oldest daughter, who is now in year 8, she'd been at primary school. We were first in Lancashire and then latterly in Lincolnshire, so she'd attended 2 primary schools. We'd never considered her to have any problems. Her attendance was always great. She was always very healthy. She was probably the healthiest member of our family. Or she would always bounce back from any physical illness, bugs, germs. She was quite robust. She liked school. She had lots of friends. She was popular. She was successful from a kind, in terms of achievement and attainment. And we'd never had any concerns about her health, well-being, education. She started secondary school about 18 months ago. She was looking forward to it. She got a new uniform. Some of her friends were going to the same school. She got a bike ready because she was going to be biking to school. Everything was in place. No worries from us. But very quickly after starting school, we were starting to see things which were troubling us. She was starting to get headaches, which became weekly. She was starting then to get tummy aches, which were weekly and then daily. She started seeming to be sad. Her disposition changed. She then didn't want to walk or bike to school with the friend who the arrangement was with. Then the mornings became very hard, and actually physically getting to school became difficult. At the time, my wife was taking her and then going on to her own work and taking her younger sisters to school, and it was becoming very upsetting. She would struggle to get into the car and then not want to get out of the car. And really between the September, when we would have said she was fine, by October half term, we were really concerned as parents. And by November, she was regularly being sick. She was having panic attacks in the middle of the night, waking up in the night. We would take turns to hold her, comfort her, calm her down, help her, find ways for her heart rate to drop. We put in a referral ourselves to Here for You through the Healthy Mind Service in November. We had an initial triage phone call in the early December. We heard nothing else. And then we scraped through as a family to Christmas that year, by which time our previously happy and jovial and sociable daughter was a shadow of herself. She wasn't eating. We would sit at the table at mealtimes. She would want food. She was vomiting regularly, having migraines 2 or 3 times a week. She would scratch her arms. She was developing a tic, saying dark things and just desperately sad. And we were watching as, I was a head teacher. My wife is a qualified teacher in a loving family, surrounded by support. Her siblings were desperate. She didn't want to play with her sisters anymore. And all of this happened, in 4 months. And we did everything we could because we made the referral as quickly as we knew there was a problem. But we were then just part of the system. Can I just pause there for a moment?
Yeah, of course you can. And I'm going to jump back a little bit to something that you said earlier, because I think it's quite an important point that you mentioned about masking. And I think as young people, if we put ourselves back into our teenage days, we probably don't tell our parents or our teachers. We kind of do hide things. And I think young people are very good at it. And then especially and then they're even better at it when it's something that they're worried about and don't want to kind of tell people about. And I think masking, I've like my son's deaf and has a speech delay, and therefore he's gone to an SRB unit. So he's been changing schools, and he quite often, even 4, 5, 6, had a lot of anxiety about going to his normal class on the Friday, because he suddenly jumped from 10 people in a class to 30 people in a class, and he found it very overwhelming and would say he had a stomach ache and cry and didn't want to go in. Or it would be the opposite, where he would go in and seemingly be fine, and everyone told me he had a lovely day, and the second he got in the car, he would just cry. And I think for me, knowing at the age of 6 that he learnt to mask it and could get through the day and then release it at the end of the day is become quite a sinking thing to me, that gosh, they learnt to do this at a very young age. And I think as teachers, especially in secondary school, where the kids pass around the school and you only see them for an hour once a week, and they don't necessarily have that same teacher like they do in primary school, it's easier for them to mask. It's easier to go, the teachers to dismiss it and be like, well, they were fine. They were absolutely fine in my lesson. I don't know what the problem is. They were fine. But they go home and they let it all out sometimes. And sometimes it's hard for schools to understand. And sometimes I even want to go as far as saying believe parents when they say they are going home, this is happening at home. Because I don't think there's enough understanding about kind of masking and what that really entails.
I absolutely agree. And I mean, I didn't, 24 years in the profession and working with so many families and vulnerable children, but I didn't understand masking. I've learned more about it in the last 18 months than I ever knew in my whole career. And, it's good to keep learning, isn't it? I'm not ashamed to say that, but I wish I'd known more, because I now look back and think of children who I could have helped better, my schools could have supported better or differently earlier on, and put in place different interventions, because actually masking, it's obviously in its very nature, it's not easy to spot. But you mentioned about not being believed, and I think you're absolutely right, because parents do know their children best, and if things are starting to unravel at home, and you're starting to explore what might be going wrong, the whole conversation about being fine in school, it's a really important topic to discuss. I mean, certainly, as you say, my background is primary, and it's not for me to make assumptions about secondary level, but I know in secondary schools, one of the ways that this can manifest is that the thing that is sometimes called internal truancy, where children might, repeatedly ask to go to the toilet, or maybe they attend one lesson but then disappear before a certain other lesson. And those are, those can be signs of masking. Unfortunately, they can become problematic because it can be interpreted as breaking rules or defiance or not conforming. And it's made more complicated because, of course, it can be. So some children might be simply not going into certain lessons for other reasons. But when we're talking about mental health and the fact that we're looking at so many children who are truly struggling with their mental health, then these are things we need to be looking out for. Is a child more withdrawn than they used to be? Is a child perhaps not eating like they used to? Are they just getting through the lessons but maybe not engaging? There's so many traits of masking, and I'm no expert, but I think these are the things we need to be looking out for children of all ages. And as you say, in a secondary, because children are going from room to room and teacher to teacher, and maybe you see teachers maybe once or twice a week. It can be so hard to spot these things, but I think parts of our education as professionals is to understand things. And certainly, if I were to be back in a position of leadership, staff CPD around mental health, anxiety, masking, all the things central to these topics, I would invest in hugely, because it's all about identifying issues early on, so that then support can be put place in a timely fashion. Because the quicker the support's put in place, the better the chances of a positive outcome.
No, I completely agree. My like my kind of mission, well, not mission, but my thing is that I'd like to see change in education. I don't think that, there's not enough time in education. There never has been. There probably never will be. But I feel like there needs to be an extra SLT member made. I feel like obviously you've got your curriculum, your attendance, your behaviour, but there needs to be a mental health SLT. The person that is just, obviously you've got the safeguarding person as well, but they're so run off their feet that there isn't the time. There needs to be a specific person that is really making sure that the mental health needs are met in the school of the students, that we kind of can spend that time really kind of delving a bit deeper and making sure, is it behaviour, or is this child actually really struggling and actually it is a cry for help? I mean, I know that there's obviously the phrase kind of like every behaviour is a message, but there are some children that are just naughty, and there are kind of children that are just trying to survive, and I think there is a real difference, and it can be noted if it's dug a little deeper. And I don't think the mental health crisis is going to go away. I think this is going to get bigger, and I don't think it's going to be solved quickly. So I do think schools, it is a shame that everything has to fall on schools, and it is another thing that schools have to deal with. But I do think that needs to be funded better, and it needs to be that there is somebody in every school that is trained to the point where they can really advise these children, so they are getting that early help like we talked about. It feels like it's just such a slow process, and it feels that help is so far away for them that we're kind of just trying to keep them going, that they need it kind of sooner. But I know you tried to have like a bit of a pastoral role within your SLT at some point when you were ahead.
I'm trying to think back to the conversation you and I had, and I think what I was saying was around attendance in particular. And you know, primaries and secondaries obviously have different ways of operating and being run, and this isn't me passing any judgment, but I always was involved as a head around cases where children were struggling to attend. So through all of my headships, I was involved when there were children whose attendance was a concern. In the old days when we had local authority EWOs, I would have my regular meetings with them. I would be the one from school joining the what we called attendance panel meetings when children had met a threshold, and we would have action plans for every individual child. So on a personal and professional level, I was usually the one in those meetings. So I had a good grasp of the families, the children involved, what their individual needs were, what the context was of their absence, and also then the whole, the oversight of school attendance. And I'm not saying that's what all heads should do, and it depends on the size of the school and priorities. But it also meant that when I was the head in the conversation with an Ofsted inspector or an HMI, I knew the attendance story inside out, but it's the story, not the figures. It's not, well, we're on this percentage, but we need to be this. I was able to articulate case studies and stories behind particular figures, and that was always important to me. And I mean, in latter years in headship at my last primary school, we created a pastoral team, and I appreciate that's not new, and secondary schools have had pastoral teams for a long time, but it's another reflection of how things have changed in education, because it didn't used to be the norm in primary schools, and we created a team, but to be honest, it wasn't big enough, because you have a pot of money and you do what you can. But my pastoral team was working flat out alongside class teachers and support staff and leadership and everybody who's also working flat out like they are in schools up and down the country, because the sheer number of children who are struggling, we're talking of unprecedented numbers. And I think you could probably employ a team. I know you mentioned about having a senior member of staff. You're right, but I think you could probably appoint 10 staff to every school and still feel like you're drowning and not achieving what you need to, such as the scale of the the issue.
But on the other hand, your daughter is now kind of attending school, and I kind of want to go through the process of kind of how you manage to achieve that, because it's not quite often it kind of fails, the kind of getting them back into school. So let's kind of start with, what questions would you ask a parent or child to make sure that they're going to get the right support on the way in?
Oh gosh, you've thrown me with that question. That's not what I thought you were going to ask. So what questions would so as a head teacher, what would you ask parents?
Yeah, what kind of things
saying?
do you think the school need to be asking to make sure they're getting the right information to be able to support the kind of start of the integration?
Well, I think even going back a step before that, I think the crucial thing is that everybody, so all parties, have as much understanding as possible as to what's happening with a child in a particular circumstance. So the very beginning has to be that the parents and the school and if involved, professionals. So in our instance, a mental health practitioner, and in more recent times, an EBSA caseworker. Now, I know not every area of the country has EBSA caseworkers, but my view would be that you need all parties to sit down, including the child where possible in the conversation, understanding where the child is at, what their health needs are, what their well-being needs are, and obviously looking at the context. So it can vary enormously, because sometimes it's about trying to maybe stopping attendance from absences from worsening, or maybe it's like in our instance where we actually temporarily pulled our daughter out of school at the school with the school's authorization, and we took a pause and we sought urgent private support because we couldn't wait any longer for the NHS support. And then when we liaised regularly all the time with the school while she was absent, and then at the time of when she was in a place which was beginning to look like we had hope and like we might be able to begin to think about some form of reintegration, that's when the conversation needs to be really candid, really detailed, so that you can start off to create something bespoke for the child. And I'm not sure I'm quite answering your question, but the crux of this is that the support needs to be bespoke for any individual based on what they're going through, what some of the catalysts or issues might be, and setting some tentative but achievable goals, and having everybody on the same page. So, this is where we're at, this is where the child is at, and this is what we would like to achieve. Does that help at all? I don't know if I answered properly what you're asking.
Yeah, no,
Sorry.
that's good. It's just kind of where those kind of first steps go. And then kind of following on from that, mainly putting on my secondary school hat, what I see most commonly is that a lot of schools go, right, we'll get them into school, they will do English and maths. If we can, we'll push them into science. We'll focus on those core subjects and they'll get the core GCSEs. As long as they come in and attend that, that's what we push, that's what we do. But from my perspective, being an art teacher, I think my subject's the best. So, but like, for example, the school that I've recently started at, there was a student on my register that was a non-attender, and mum just happened to email just saying, by the way, my child doesn't come into school, but she loves art. Is there any work that she can do? And I said, well, bring in her work. I want to see it. So they brought them in. We had a meeting in one of the offices before they got to school, and we had a lovely meeting because I just love talking and trying to build kids up. I think it's really important. And I think that's quite important, making sure the right person is the first person that they come in contact with in the school. And we had a lovely conversation. And then I set her a little task, and then we had a meeting the next week. But I was booked into the next meeting room, so she had to come through one more door, and it was the first room as soon as she came into the school. So she was another step forward and had another meeting. And then after that, I was like, well, let's actually physically get some paint out. I don't have a lesson this time. Come in like 5 minutes after the lesson starts, so nobody's in the corridor. We'll wander to my room, we'll do some work, and then we'll wander you back out before any of the other lessons are out. You don't see anybody. And Mum really panicked. Mum was like, gosh, she's not put on her school uniform for a really long time. I think she's really going to melt down and struggle with this. And she said, actually, she got up, was happy as Larry, popped her uniform in, came in, did it, and great. And now she does that every week with me. And she's really growing in confidence, and now felt like she could come in and do some of her mocks in school for other subjects. And I feel like there's this huge pressure from schools to come in and do English and maths. And actually, maybe we need to flip it and look at it another way. How would you kind of look at kind of what is best for the student, but also kind of thinking about the school in the same hat?
So, I mean, this is a really good topic, and I'm so passionate about this. I think it was heartwarming to hear about that example you've just given and about the subject of art. As far as I'm concerned, we need to completely flip the narrative on the way we currently see what you might call part-time timetables or reintegration plans. And I'm talking across the system, so I'm not interested in criticizing individual schools or local authorities or trusts or anything like that. But I genuinely think we've got to start doing something differently, because the sad truth is with part-time timetables around mental health. So there can be other reasons why children are put on part-time timetables. But when I'm talking in this conversation, I'm specifically thinking about in relation to mental health. When a child is put on a part-time timetable, either reduced from full-time to part-time, or maybe they're out of education and the timetable is a kind of a mechanism for their reintegration. The sad truth is the vast majority of those timetables aren't successful. So this isn't anecdotal. This is known and proven. The majority of timetables don't succeed. And when I say don't succeed, there are 2 points really that I'm referring to. One is that they don't ultimately lead to the child's full-time return to their school, their named school. But more importantly, I would argue, the part-time timetable also doesn't result in resolving or reducing the child's symptoms of mental health. So, a part-time timetable in itself won't address the reasons why a child is suffering from anxiety, but they might help. They might help a child back to school or to engage with education. But the reality is, in the majority of instances, they don't work ultimately. And so what that looks like is ultimately the parents might make the decision to deregister the child from that school, or they might choose to deregister for home education. The school might feel that they can no longer meet the child's needs. There's all sorts of different outcomes, but each of those outcomes is often problematic, because most families aren't in a position where, if their child is suddenly out of school, where one of the parents can give up their job, or if it's a single parent, that they can give up their job and care for their child or offer home education. The consequences of this in almost every instance is profound and massive. And in our own family, the only reason, I'll be more careful with my words. It just so happens that I left headship in January last year, due to my own chronic ill health relating to COVID. And it's meant that I've not been in employment. But had I still been a head teacher, the strain related to my daughter's ill health and the pressure and the urgency to support her would have meant that either me or my wife would have had to make an urgent decision to leave our job, probably. And it's only because I've been able to devote the last year to supporting her, to advocating for her, to championing her, to expediting the right support, that we have had the success we've had. You know, for every sort of story like ours, there are dozens where, you know, families are at breaking point, the child isn't getting any better, they're still waiting for that CAMS appointment, they're still under pressure to attend school, but they're often not in school. So a parent, maybe they're taking a lot of time off work, or they leave their job, or they are sacked, or, you know, and the financial implications are just enormous. But to come back to your question, I'm sorry for the long-winded answer. We can do things differently, and we've been doing things differently in our family for our daughter, and with the school's support and agreement, and it's been transformational. And it's shown that when you can do things differently, when you are prepared to invest in time and compassion, and when you don't obsess about progress 8 or attendance figures, but you do obsess about somebody's health and well-being, then you can actually turn things around. And I'm not saying this in a cliched way, but I believe we've saved our daughter. And I'm not saying that lightly. You know, we were watching her deteriorate before our very eyes, and we had to do something different. So we paused her school attendance because for her, school was on fire. And it wasn't just school. We stopped being able to go out. She stopped being able to go in the car. We couldn't go to church anymore. We couldn't have friends around. When the doorbell rang, she was in such a state that she cowered on the sofa. And that's no way to live, is it? And certainly not at any age, and not when you're 11 or 12. And we had to do things differently. So we took a pause from school for 2 months. And then we kept in touch with school. We weren't trying to be evasive. We weren't questioning the value of education or the importance of school. She never stopped wanting to go to school. She would still get her uniform out sometimes. She would still talk about her friends, but everything became impossible. And we had this pause, and then we had some urgent professional mental health support, which was invaluable. And when the time was right, we started to have some conversations with school. And what we had learned as parents was that for whatever reason, the inside of the school building had become very traumatic for our daughter. There hadn't been a huge catalyst, that there wasn't a significant trauma still to this day that we know of, but the inside of the school building was causing her huge trauma that was making her body produce adrenaline, which she couldn't slow down, which meant that she was 24/7 living in this, hypervigilant fight, flight, freeze state. And when we felt the time was right, we had some conversations with school, and the way back into school wasn't an English lesson, it wasn't a maths lesson, it wasn't sitting in the foyer for half an hour or an hour. It was with the school's groundskeeper, a gardener, I guess, in different terms. And what happened, it started last April. Around this week last year, we pulled her out of school. Around late April after Easter, that was the tentative first steps back into school. And it consisted of me taking her to school, remaining nearby physically. And it was officially gardening club, but actually, as it turned out, for the first few months, she was the only person who attended. And it was the school's groundskeeper, and we would attend at lunchtime, and we would go once a week and then twice a week. And, initially for 20 minutes and then half an hour and then an hour. And what was remarkable was that the groundskeeper, who, of all the people on the school staff, not employed to care for children or to educate them, but her ability, her understanding of nurture was second to none. She knows how to nurture for plants and flowers and to make things grow and remain in good health. And she took our daughter like some sort of seedling, and she nurtured her without saying very much. There was no agenda. There was no homework. There was no judgment. There was no backstory. There was no counselling. She just listened and didn't say a lot. And she helped my daughter make her first steps back onto the school grounds. And over 3 months, late April, May, June, into July, that was the beginning of our reintegration. It was me outside, nearby, with my daughter, a groundskeeper, nurturing plants and beginning to rebuild confidence after a very distressing period in her life. And that was really phase one. We had the pastoral leader from the school would come out and say hello, and gradually that increased. And over the months, I gradually took a step back. So, I might have been on the other side of a fence or in the car in the school car park. So she still had that comfort of knowing I was nearby. And there were, sometimes people talk about graded exposure. It was a bit like that, but highly bespoke. And there was no mention of lessons for months. There was no mention of going inside. And when that did happen, it was almost by accident. So gradually a few other people started coming to gardening club. Gradually one or two of her friends would join in. And one day, on the spur of the moment, one of them asked if she wanted to go and get something from the canteen. And she made her way to the canteen with them. And that was her first step back inside the building. I better pause there. I'm sorry.
No. I find it so interesting. And I think it is that it's the school getting the right balance of how to nurture, as you say, and get that child into the school. It's not this, well, you're going to do one lesson this day, you're going to come in and do period 1 every day, and then you're going to do period 1 and 2, and then you're going to do period 1 and 3. Oh, and by this point you'll be in full time. It doesn't kind of work like that. It needs to be kind of working out what's going to work best for that child. And I do think it is that it's finding what will make your child engage, what will also almost relax their nervous system and make them settle into a situation. Because once they feel calm and they feel safe, then they can relax and kind of take it all in. I think if they're always in this heightened state of fight or flight, then they're never going to succeed. They're just looking for the thing that's going to set them off and spiral them down. And I think that's quite often why part-time timetables don't necessarily always work, is that they're not kind of necessarily, they're thinking more of what the school needs to achieve as opposed to what the student needs to achieve. But in terms of, you explained to me yesterday quite an interesting way that you looked at how to work out which subject and maybe which teachers might be best in order to help reintegration.
Yeah, so I guess just to bridge a bit of time here for anybody who's sort of following this journey. By the summer holidays, my daughter was attending a couple of times a week gardening club. Gradually, I was pulling back, so I was physically more distant while she was attending. She was attending for longer. Gradually, more children came in, and then another highlight of the summer term was that she was able to attend her year group's end of year. It was a geography field trip to Lincoln, which is about an hour of a journey from where we live. And that was a huge milestone, because she had to overcome so many fears to do that. Fast forward to September, and she was gradually, we'd by that point we'd completed a program of private support. She was also then receiving weekly support from a mental health practitioner, which was face-to-face and local, and hugely valuable. And come September, we were then able to plan with the school what we felt a reintegration might look like. I should say, in the summer term, as well as while she was out of school, we were also doing some schoolwork. It wasn't that we weren't accessing any learning. We had remote learning from home, and because I was at home and out of work, I was able to support with that. But then from September, we've taken an approach which is, and again I use the word bespoke, it's highly individualized. It's not obsessing about time, and it's not linear. And I guess that the takeaways I would want to give to people, whether people are listening to this as educators or perhaps parents, the traditional way of coming at a part-time timetable or a reduced timetable is to see it in quite a linear way, and also to have time as quite a governing factor. And what we've done with our daughter, with the school support, is to do something really different. So we sat down with the pastoral leader in the beginning of September, and the school had recently appointed a new pastoral leader. So she was coming in not having been part of our earlier journey, but fresh face, very keen to support and make things work. And we decided we would look at creating something unique for our daughter, which grew as her health returned and recovered. So it was never about attending X number of lessons in this week and then X in week 2 and by week 4 doing this. The premise was always, the starting point was where she was and her health and her well-being, and factoring in everything. So how well she was eating, how well she was sleeping, how well she was socializing, and then developing something which worked from that starting point. And this actually came from the school, not us, and it might sound perhaps controversial to some, but it was suggested that we RAG rated some crucial things relating to school to give us a starting point. And this was sensitively done by the school and by us, but over the course of several meetings and conversations with me, my wife, our daughter, the school, her mental health practitioner, we RAG rated the subjects on the curriculum. So, red, amber, green, and also her teachers. And obviously that's remained confidential, and I'm conscious that some people might think, oh, I'm not sure about that, but it's been absolutely pivotal, because you can take the approach where you say, well, yeah, let's get them in for maths, or let's get them in for core subjects, or let's have them in mornings only, or for the first hour of the day. But what this approach does is it takes the child, and then it looks at things which will give them or things which are perhaps less anxiety inducing. So if let's say, for example, a child really struggles with maths, or let's say it was an incident in a maths lesson, or an incident with a maths teacher which was perhaps a catalyst some time ago for some anxiety. And I'm not, this is hypothetical, so I'm just saying that let's imagine that. If you then say we're starting off with maths, and you're going to be in a maths room, then quite logically that won't help to reduce a child's anxiety, and that isn't a helpful way forward, because you're giving a child potentially that very catalyst as the thing they've got to get over first. And conversely, what I talked about with our daughter was, inside school had become so traumatic that she couldn't cope with anything. So our starting point was outside. Similarly, you've mentioned art, and the creative subjects can be a fantastic way of engaging children, any children. But if a child then says you do some rag rating, and the child says they love art, they're green for art, and they're also really comfortable with that teacher, they like them, they feel safe, green, then you've got double green. And what you've got is a potential way in, because actually starting with double green is going to be more successful than starting with double red. And what we did, and it was awkward, and we found it quite difficult. Even me, as having been ahead, and my wife and my daughter, she was concerned about, should I say this, because this person is a senior member of staff, and do I want to say that this that this person is red? But actually, it was so helpful. And what we've done, she went into her first lesson, an art lesson. Actually, you'll be pleased to hear. Back in September, and I wouldn't say she stumbled in it, but it was chosen to be art. It was in a separate building in school. It was, I think it was double green, and it was the end of a day. So rather than being first thing in the morning, we also looked at the timings of the day, and the arrangement was she would literally show her face in this art lesson. And actually what she did was she went in and she stayed for the whole art lesson. And from that little seed, we've created a timetable which has grown with her over the last, it's 6 months really of this timetable. But crucially, what we do is, initially it was every week, and then it was every fortnight, and currently it's every 3 weeks. I would meet in school with the pastoral leader and with my daughter, and we would reflect on the week we'd had, or the 2 weeks we'd had, or now the 3 weeks. We would talk about her in a very whole way. So it wasn't just about her attendance figure. It was about how she's feeling, what she's found difficult, what she's enjoyed, not just school, what she's done at home, what she's done that's new at home, because within all of this, it's not just been about going back to school. It's been about being able to go back to church, being able to go in shops when she couldn't, being able to go to her friends' parties, being able to go in the car. And so we've reflected on what she's been able to do, how well she's been eating and sleeping, and how her symptoms have diminished. And as we've looked at all of that, we've then organically grown the expectation. But it's not been in a linear way. So it's not been 1 hour on a Monday and then 2 hours on a Monday, or an hour every day in week 1 and 2 hours a day in week 2. This is month 6 of something completely unique. And as of today, she attends the school building 4 days a week. Every Thursday we have what's called, we call it a fire break. It's a chance for her to catch her breath and not have quite such pressure, because her anxiety isn't cured. She's so much better than she was a year ago, but this is part of the way of helping her to rebuild. So she attends different lessons on different days. Some days it's 2 lessons. Tomorrow she's in from lesson 2 till the end of the day. But back in September and October, sometimes she would just go in for her form time, or for lunchtime, or for even for a break time and then a lesson. It's been created in a very specific way that she's been able to cope with. And I guess the bottom line is, she's recovering. She's healthy again. She is back in school. She never wanted to not be in school. She didn't like not being in school. She didn't like being unwell. She always, she would look at her uniform. She would talk about her friends. She would even talk about teachers. It was never about hating school or not liking education. She never stopped wanting to engage. She simply was unable to operate in the way that is conventional for a child or a young person. And it's been about rebuilding and prioritizing her health so that she could return to the life she had, so that ultimately she can thrive.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
This is what Teacher Talk Radio is about. It's all about having these amazing kind of open conversations, really looking at every different viewpoint on different scenarios. And that wouldn't be possible without our amazing sponsors over at John Catt Educational. So make sure you pop over to their website, johncattbookshop.com, and you can use our code JCTTR2324 for 20% off any of your orders. And they've got some great books over there as well on well-being and things like that to kind of support your understanding of these kind of things. But I think the really important thing is that you said that it needs to be bespoke. And I think that's what we need to kind of break down this stigma that we need to get the kids in. They need to be attending this, this and this. And as long as they kind of get maths and English and they don't affect our data as much. But I'm going to bring up the Cultural Learning Alliance did a study and that actually doing those students that study the arts and the creative arts do have less mental health issues. That was one of the studies that did it, but also it had an impact on their maths and English increased by 15%. So I think as a school, if you don't come from the arts, it's really difficult to maybe see the benefit of them doing that subject, but actually kind of taking that hat off and thinking about the student and the situation and really working out which situation is going to calm them and going to make them kind of start growing again, start thriving again, is really key in order to getting this kind of flexi timetable and building it up and getting it to work. If you and there are going to be blips, it's never going to be smooth sailing. Like you said, like some days it is hit and miss. There's going to be different days of the year, especially trying to get through winter with like less sunlight and things. It's going to make it a lot harder to get up and get in as opposed to like a summer term. But you have to be flexible for those students and you have to work with the parents. I think is the most important thing that's kind of come from this is having those open conversations and working with everybody on board and being really frank and honest that if you kind of put all this pressure on the parents, like they must be in, they should be doing this by now, you're not really listening. It's about kind of having really good communication and really listening to each other. It's kind of what I've taken from it. Is there anything else that you would say that's really important for schools to kind of take on board?
I'm just looking at the notes I made. Two things really. I'd like to say, if I may. One is, anybody listening, I don't want people to think that here I am preaching about how things should be done. I've got to say, I was ahead for a long time in 3 different schools, and boy, did I get this wrong. I think back now to a couple of children in particular who were essentially struggling in the same way that my daughter is, but at a younger age. And, I got things wrong. And with the knowledge I have now, I know I would do things so differently. For example, I tried the linear approach with part-time timetables. Let's try an hour in the morning, and we'll get you into the main entrance, and then we'll take it from there. And I did that in good faith. I did that compassionately, supportively, not in a nasty way. But, I can think of children where we did that and they would spend protracted amounts of time absolutely distraught with a parent, clinging to a parent. I would be there, or maybe my deputy head, and we'd be comforting them, hand on, comforting the parent, comforting the child, telling them they would be okay, telling them everything was going to be okay. And I look back now and think, even though I did that with good intentions, I just didn't help, because at that moment in time, that child was too distressed to be there, and I was simply making it worse. And it didn't need to be like that. The other thing I would say is, it's quite a big takeaway. I think the title of this show, I think, was Flexi Timetabling, which I like. What my daughter officially has is a part-time timetable, but the reality is it's probably more akin to something called flexi schooling. And flexi schooling is a formal agreement between parents and schools where children are scheduled to be in school for a certain amount of time, a certain timetable, but then there's a commitment on the parents' part to be providing the other part of the education when the child isn't in school. Now, as I say, we haven't actually signed up to flexi schooling for my daughter, but what we have had is a very long part-time bespoke timetable. If anybody's unclear on this, educators or parents, the DFE guidance, again, is actually very clear. It allows part-time timetables for children with ill health, with physical ill health, mental ill health. But it does stipulate that part-time timetables mustn't be permanent. They must be time limited. And for me, one of the biggest problems across the profession is that we're coming at this from much too short a time scale. So quite typically, a part-time timetable might be created to last 4 weeks or 6 weeks. And then when it's not successful, the message is, this hasn't worked, we need to do something different. But actually, my view is being flexible, attending for a reduced amount of time, whether you call that a part-time timetable or a reintegration timetable or flexi schooling, which is different but not dissimilar. All of those things can be successful, but it's about the long term. And we know with other ill health issues, physical health issues, sometimes treatment and recovery takes a very, very long time. And, as I say, it's almost a year to the week since we pulled our daughter out of school. Over 6 months since she stepped back into a lesson, but she's recovering. She's no longer being ill in the middle of the night or hurting herself or saying dark things. And I will be forever grateful. And it's, we've had professional support from the NHS, privately, from the school, and we've tried to do things differently. And we're on a journey, but we're going in a very good direction. I'll stop there.
This might take us over with me asking this question, but I know that you have actually been part of a panel that has spoken to the DFE. What do we need to get them to understand so that they stop putting this pressure on schools to make these kids attend?
Wow,
I've loaded it right at the end.
we might need a whole other. Will we get cut off?
No,
or am
you're
I okay to answer? Okay, great. So, thank you. Yeah, well, I guess firstly to say I completely understand the pressure that schools are under, and in particular leaders and heads are under, around attendance figures, and the accountability from a national top level is just off the scale. I've never known it like this, where there's such an interest in attendance figures. I would urge head teachers and school leaders not to lose sight of common sense and humanity and compassion. The DFE agenda is frankly, the campaign, the Moments Matter campaign, is frankly abhorrent. It trivializes masking. It encourages children to go into school when they're ill, even though that we know we've got an ill health crisis with staff and children in schools. There's never been a time like it when so many people are unwell, and the messages from the DfE are: be in school. You must be in school. School's the best place to be. School's the safest place to be. If you don't go in school, you won't learn, and your parents will be in trouble, and so on and so on. And my view is the DfE have got this completely wrong. They are obsessing over attendance figures, which are actually numbers on a page. They're not obsessing over health. They're not fixing the things that are broken or that are strained, which could actually help children and adults to be back in school and to be healthier. So you're absolutely right. I've had a couple of meetings with the DfE, with the attendance or the comms team. One of them, we spoke with a senior member of the DfE around the working together to improve school attendance document and looking at things like penalty notices, part-time timetables, the coding of children's absences. And actually, we had a really good discussion about some of the things which we think should be different and which could help both schools to manage attendance and children when they're struggling to attend, so helping all parties. A more recent meeting was with the comms team around the Moments Matter campaign, and I probably shouldn't say too much about that. Suffice to say, it was frustrating, and I aired my views about the fact that the Moments Matter campaign, I think listeners will know what I'm talking about. These images of one of them has a child and it said they had a runny nose before and now look at them, and another said they had tummy ache but now look at them. And I think we've got to be really careful. This is getting quite dystopian and perverse, really, where we're sort of saying that there's an implication that children were pretending to be ill, or that their parents were neurotic and keeping off children when they actually should be in school. And I think we're wandering into really strange territory there as a society when we're making these judgments, because ultimately parents know best. I didn't know best. I didn't know my children better than parents when I was a head teacher or a teacher. I've got 4 children. I know them. My wife and I know them better than the school can know their health. And if we think, if we think they're not well enough to attend, then that's our call. But I think there's a problem that the DfE is overstepping its jurisdiction in terms of suggesting when children shouldn't be in school. We're still living in a pandemic. We're still living in a time when many people are ill, and it sometimes feels like it's out of control, the absence levels. I totally accept, as an educator, that there are times when you might feel a child perhaps could have come back to school earlier, or maybe you might even be suspicious about why a child is absent. But to be fair, the vast majority of children, the vast majority of the time, are absent when they're unwell with legitimate reason. They're not well enough to be in school, and we have to give that judgment call to the parents. To the DfE, I would be saying, you've got to know your own jurisdiction, and we've got to let schools manage attendance in a sensible, pragmatic, but compassionate way. We're talking about human beings, not numbers. We're talking about lives, not percentages. And it's dead easy to get lost in statistics. I've given you some statistics tonight, but we have to remember that we're talking about people's lives. And my goodness, if 2 years ago you'd have told me that one of my own children would go from being happy and thriving and successful and to hurting herself and developing a tic and saying very, very dark things and not being able to get out of her bedroom and not being able to keep food down. If somebody had told me that a few years ago, I would not have believed that. This can happen to absolutely anybody, and it's happening all over the place. I think my final message would be we've got to start doing things differently. The DFE have got to start doing things differently. As an education system, we've got to start seeing what we can do differently because of the sheer number of children who are struggling. And we know that the waiting times for medical support are long. So we've got to just think, what can we do different? What can we do more quickly? How can we turn this around? And it won't come from penalty notices. It won't come from prosecutions. It won't come from refusing to authorise absences. And it won't come in a linear way. It's going to be unique, organic, different for every single child and family. But compassion, empathy, understanding, support, patience, time, space, those things are all absolutely key.
I think you've put it so beautifully, and thank you so much for joining me tonight. I feel like everyone needs to go have a follow Steve and follow his journey with his family and find out how we get on, because I just putting my heart out for your daughter, and I just hope that she really thrives and does well. And I mean, we all know those lovely posters that came from the DofE. I don't think they quite hit the right note with any teacher, but we had a great chat about those on the weekly review show, which you can catch up with online, or you can join in on any Sunday live over at 10 o'clock on both Twitter and LinkedIn, and you can watch us on video and actually see us on those ones. So there's some good healthy debate on those if you want to go and have a little look at those. And thank you again for our sponsor, John Catt. Make sure you go and use the code JCTTR2324. We don't know how much longer it's going to be there for, so you've got 20% off any of their educational books. And just thank you once again to my guest, Steve, and thank you to everybody listening, and especially those that have been here throughout SEN Mum. You've been great and engaging in this chat as well as Rebecca. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.